All right. Now, Namibia's research and innovation landscape has received international recognition following the appointment of NCRST CEO Prof. Anicia Peters to the governing board of the Global Research Council. Now, in this role, she will represent Sub-Saharan Africa from the 2026 to 2029, contributing to global decision-making on research priorities, collaboration, and science development. Now, Prof. Peter joins us in the studio to unpack what this milestone means to her, to Namibia, and to the entire Sub-Saharan African region. Prof, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me in the studio.
All right, congratulations once again. Indeed, it is a milestone or an achievement.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. You know, it's a lot of hard work that
Indeed.
comes with it as well, but I think that the rewards are always very sweet.
Indeed. Now, talk to us about what this achievement means to you and to Namibia at large.
Well, you know, I became the CEO of NCRST in 2023, and I walked into the Global Research Council's meeting, where there's over 100 heads of research councils from around the world, right? From very powerful nations to just everyone is in the room. But from Africa, we were very few there. But for me, the significance was when I walked into the room, Namibia was absent for a number of years from the Global Research Councils, so we were welcomed back. But many people remembered me from, I gave a speech at one of the Global Research Councils meeting in 2015.
Wow.
And so they remembered me, and at my very first time of appearing there, I had to read what is called the Statement of Principles. And that is sort of statements of principles are principles that guides all of the research landscapes and ecosystems around the world, in all of the countries. We all implement it into our research system. So it shapes the agendas, it shapes the instruments, but you have to be always there as a head. You can't be absent from any one of those meetings. And so every year my role grew, and my responsibilities grew, and sometimes you didn't even know whether you had a moment to sit down and rest. One of my new staff members who accompanied me last year was saying, "Prof, is this what you're doing when you're coming to this?" But at the end of the day, you know, look where we are now. For instance, South Africa exited this year, and that seat was left vacant, and therefore I now filled the seat. This is bringing a lot of prestige, a lot of visibility to not only Africa, but also to Namibia in particular. And I represent Sub-Saharan Africa, but in particular Southern Africa. We will have somebody from West Africa next year joining us on the council, and then we have somebody from East Africa joining us. So in terms of shaping the global research instruments, global research agenda, that is essentially the body that's doing it.
And how important is this role in terms of just serving on it and influential on the global research body, and how will it also just be beneficial for Southern Africa and Namibia at large?
So I'm somewhat of a rebel. So when I walked in, one of the provocations that I did was that I was chairing a lot of the meetings and the events, and I always did the provocation to say, what are we doing in terms of geopolitics? Because we all profess to be neutral when we are heads of national research councils. And that sort of spurred a whole debate as to how do we protect scientists, how do we protect researchers across borders. Another one is shaping the global research agenda, right? We import so many things from outside, including research instruments, our ethics, our research ethics, our, you know, what should be the priority areas. But where is the chance to raise your voice and say, no, wait a minute, it does not work for us in Africa. It doesn't work for us in Namibia.
Indeed.
It's a whole different set. And I remember we were very provocative recently with open science. And we said, but, you know, coming from an indigenous knowledge system, we were questioning even the AI systems and research that is currently happening around the world. And I think, and that is what it gives us. It gives me a voice to be a conduit for, you know, for Southern Africa, for Namibia, in the global space.
And what will your role be in the governing board? What will it involve?
Well, my role in the governing board, there are 12 members on the governing board. And what we do is we sort of shape the global research priorities. We also determine what are the next themes, what are the next statement of principles that we would like to adopt. Also, where in the world are we going to when we are hosting these annual meetings? It's also shaping collaborations. You know, with whom do we collaborate? How do we collaborate? And of course, it also shapes the research funding that is made available to councils and how the research funding flows.
And also just talk to us about the opportunities this appointment create for Namibia's research, science, technology and innovation sectors. We know that you have been doing great work in that field. Perhaps just how it will contribute to the overall goal.
So maybe one of the areas that I can say, coinciding with my role on the Global Research Councils, is also my incoming presidency on the Sub-Saharan Africa Science Granting Councils initiative. And on that one, for instance, we have raised 42 million USD so far, so that we can support research within Africa. And we are supporting the STISA, that is the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, that was launched under the African Union in February. So that is what we are supporting in terms of research funding, right? So researchers in Namibia are already benefiting from such instruments. Like we have given out over 8 research grants last year that was funded from that fund that's almost like an Africa Research Fund. So bringing this into the space of the Global Research Councils creates visibility for Namibia as a country, for Namibia and its researchers. So suddenly we were having so many European partners, as an example, saying, but you know, our researchers are always saying they would like to work with researchers from within Africa, but we don't know how to access them. Now, myself sitting there is I can connect them to the researchers at NUST, at the researchers at UNAM, at IUM, at Valvicha, etc., within Namibia. And that is how we build bridges, and that is how we get more sort of research funding, but also when we determine priority areas, we don't need to look at only sort of, you know, across the borders, but we can look inside our own country, bring our own experience, saying which countries have the creative, culture creative industries, for instance, as priority areas, sports as priority areas. These are very new areas that are opening up into the global research domains.
Prof, talk to us about what lessons or best practices from leading research nations do you hope to bring back to Namibia during your term? I know you mentioned some of them.
You know, it's one of the wishes that I have is that we are, you know, under the Science Granting Council's initiative and now with the GRC, we are engaging, for instance, with Science Europe. That is uniting all of the research bodies and funding bodies across Europe. And we are trying to speak to them in terms of joining our Africa research funding initiative and funding research on the continent as well. So sitting in those conversations, there is one thing that I feel on the continent. There are many things on the continent that are still lacking, but there are also many things that are really good, because we tend to speak about negatives as opposed to positives many times. But one of the things that is lacking is obviously funding, but infrastructure, research infrastructure, laboratories, equipment, and then, of course, also giving time to our researchers to do research, not only to teach, because in our universities we are still over-teaching. But the moment that you bring in systems of postdocs, full-time PhD, full-time master students, you are alleviating the teaching load also on the professors in the universities. But the important thing that's coming, and there was a provocation that was done, that we in Africa, we've done, coming from somebody who served on the African Union, so a fellow African, we have done a STISA before, this Africa Strategy for Research, Science, or Science, Technology and Innovation. We had one for 10 years that ran until 2024. What were the outcomes? Nothing. We are now having one running until 2034. What do we hope to achieve? There are 5 priority areas in there. Is it going to be implemented? Is it going to translate to the people on the ground, in the communities? And most importantly, who's funding it? Because you're building a strategy without having the funding upfront. Now, with the European nations, we're learning that they first get the funding right, and then they talk about the strategy. For instance, in Europe, they are busy planning for the next 10 years, the P10, for the next 10 years in terms of research funding, in terms of development funding, in terms of this, in terms of that. And the ministers responsible for science and technology, or research, science and technology, they get together and they sort of spearhead this, almost like we have the Green Industrialization Council, but specifically in terms of research. And this is where the commitment comes, but also the follow-through that they are following through. And this is the wish that I have. And I've actually proposed that we bring together the African ministers responsible for research, science and technology, and do that. Let them take stock. Let them say, what do they see as their priorities as well, and what we need to achieve, and let them commit then the funding, from the national coffers, but at least they will know where it goes to. That is a very big dream of mine. Indeed. I hope it will come true.
Hopefully, yes. I'm sure it will. With your expertise, it will. Now, just to talk about the previous speakers were talking about research as well, especially at universities, and the need for implementation, and not just to do research for the sake of research. I will really want to hear your views on that in terms of maybe just mobilizing that, or also just funds, and also making sure that students or whoever is in that industry of research, that it's fully capacitated, and also that it's implemented as well.
Okay, so off the bat, if you're talking about PhD and master's students, these are research degrees that they are following, unless you have an MBA or something like that, where it's technically oriented. But if you're following a PhD and a master's, especially by research degree, then you need to have research time, and that translates into full-time scholarships, full-time studentship. Right? Because you cannot grow the research then with just doing things part-time. And any good professor in research needs full-time PhD and master's students and postdocs. Then the second part of it is that they obviously need funding, because they need research laboratories, they need fieldwork time, they need to have equipment. So all of that comes. We are now offering full-time scholarships for PhD and masters, but we've started off small, and we are actually building in precisely that. Research equipment, research time in the field, and then of course we decided to pay them also a pretty decent monthly allowance, because they do have families when they are already PhDs. I was on a scholarship when I had a big family. So we know that they can also not just, survive out on very little. And of course, very important, they need to go to conferences. They need to be able to publish. So they need to be able to go on, if they're not going on Erasmus Plus that they were speaking before, they need to be able to visit peers in other countries, right? Research exchange. So we provide essentially for all of that. But it should not only be applied research. We want to have applied research with impact in the communities.
Indeed.
But now the Global Research Councils is actually embarking again on curiosity-driven research, which is fundamental basic research. You know, where does AI come from? It comes from curiosity-driven research. Many of the systems as we know it, many of the devices and new inventions as we know it, did not have an application. It was developed through basic research or curiosity-driven research. And we want to say that curiosity-driven research can eventually translate into research that could solve so many problems, whether it be health, whether it be food security, whether it be water or energy.
Indeed.
So that's...
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof. We unfortunately ran out of time. I really would have loved to chat with you more, but thank you so much for being on Daily Roundup this evening, and all the best with your appointment.
Thank you so much.